is Zara Kazmi. I am a co-founder of Safe Muslim Heritage. I live in Buckinghamshire and I have worked in the NHS for over 10 years as an IT manager. I have a family that I've raised in Buckinghamshire as well, where I've been born and bred myself. And it's actually allowed us to expand our because it's more of a predominantly white area. There's a lot of heritage areas around there, so that's contributed to my passion for heritage generally.
My name is Sara Bukhari. I'm a producer presenter at SafeerTV and I'm also the co-founder of the campaign Safe Muslim Heritage. I was born and raised outside of London in Buckinghamshire, which always felt very different to the people I've met in the past few years, having moved into London and having been working in London now. I think my upbringing was very different. When you're raised in a town, your upbringing is very diverse. You are around people who aren't so much from your culture, they're from different religions, different backgrounds. So this constant dialogue is always making you question, who are you? Where do I come from? What am I? What religion do I really belong to? What is really my belief? And for this reason, I've spent a lot of my childhood questioning my own self and wanting to find out more about my identity.
Safe Muslim Heritage, we initiated that in 2013. I am one of the co-founders, and my role's been a lot of the back-end admin work, producing documentation, reports to be presented to MPs and to local business leaders and religious leaders when we're highlighting the campaign. I've helped in designing the promos and also the leaflets that have gone out. We've had information packs where I've also researched and looked into what we need to input into those.
So we felt like education is a pivotal point of getting people aware about such a cause such as heritage. It's not easily accessible to all of us, so we thought that as a community grassroots initiative we'd help everybody raise awareness in regards to the heritage that we have in the Middle East. So that's what Safe Muslim Heritage, that's where it began, and that's what the main cause and the aim of it is.
I've also been responsible for coordinating two conferences, national conferences that we held in 2013 and 14. And really liaising with other interfaith leaders and leaders within our own community and highlighting the cause of heritage.
I remember when I went on my first Umrah trip that I remember was in 2008, and when I went to Saudi Arabia I was deeply upset, disheartened by seeing the state of some of the graves present in that land. They were destroyed, personalities who are revered as saints weren't even given headstones as a burial. Bodies were disintegrated over time, and this was all very different to the upbringing I'd had in a British town outside of London. When I grew up, I was encouraged to go to churches, I was encouraged to pay my respects to beliefs, not only my own belief but other people's beliefs. I was encouraged to go and visit the graveyards and places where people who were saints were buried. And this whole culture completely clashed with what I was used to, what I saw in Saudi Arabia. And this upset me deeply because identity, a huge part of my identity is my religion. And I felt like the whole historical aspect of my religion had almost been targeted and tarnished because of these desecrations that were constantly occurring.
Heritage is a part of what I am today. I don't think we get to where we are in life without our history of our own immediate life and our family, where we come from, and also as human beings. Where did we, how has our journey been from the beginning of civilization? We've track records from heritage sites. So that's all incumbent on what we are today, and I believe that it's part and parcel of who we are. So for me, it's you cannot eliminate it from who you are. You need to find out your roots to discover who you are today.
When I looked into it further, I came to realise that more than 90% of heritage in Saudi Arabia had been destroyed. And this was just literally in the past few decades, which means that we are literally in the era right now living through history where history is being destroyed. This ultimately gave me this sort of passion. It kind of kindled a fire within me to realise that every one of us is responsible, because in the end of the day the pages of history are being written, we're living in that time. If we don't do something about this, who's going to do it?
We've gone down the route of lobbying MPs, of even getting this highlighted, this issue of Muslim heritage being destroyed to the UN. We've had tremendous support, and we're constantly looking at ways as a grassroots campaign to reach out to people, for them to understand and relate to heritage in their own life, So obviously residing in the UK, we're looking at how, I mean, I've grown up, schooled here, I'm born in the UK. You know that you're encouraged to visit churches and places of history from a young age. So to be able to relate that to how we preserve, unfortunately in the Middle East at the moment where heritage is mostly, where it's being destroyed, and looking at how in the British Isles we've managed to preserve it, certainly at this era. I know they've had their own history of destruction, but it's fascinating to look at places. I've personally been to various places up north with over 1,000-year-old monasteries that I personally love. So it's really bringing that into the campaign of comparing what's happening here in the UK, what we have, and then also seeing how we're as Muslims, we are dealing with the issue of heritage and preserving and not preserving so well at the moment.
Some people think it's just, oh, it's history. Oh, if you're interested in history and you're interested in architecture or heritage, then heritage is for you, or you can get interested in trying to preserve heritage. But when you really look back into it and you look at verses from the Quran also, which say, travel in the land, look at those who came before you, the people who came before you were a lesson to you, and see and learn from them how you're supposed to be. How am I supposed to know who I am without knowing who came before me and knowing the people who came before me to teach me who I am going to be today with the eternal values? So heritage really is a preservation of identity, core values, morality. It all stems from heritage, and I think for that reason heritage is a crucial part of civilization. The Heritage Trail, initially we came up with this idea when we were on a visit to Bath earlier this year. We were in February time.
It was absolutely beautiful, and I didn't get much time to do a lot. Went on the tour bus as a typical tourist, but really you can see how as a city that has been honoured by the UNESCO as a World Heritage City, it's unique in its element. It's one of the only cities that as an entire city it is a UNESCO Heritage Site. So to obviously continue that legacy, they have to do something well, and I think that to go to Bath, it'd be interesting to see how they preserve it, who's actually behind the whole city makeup of what's going on, where they're forward planning, what they're preserving, how old is their heritage that they've got. I mean, we've got cities like that in I'm sure in Iraq and Syria that are civilizations centuries old, and it would just be nice to be able to contrast what we do here compared to what's happening over there in the East at the moment.
Fascinated by the archaeological factor here, and particularly the floor, because you were saying that it's still the very same floor from 2,000 years ago and it's still being preserved. So how do you think, do you think it's always going to stay this way? Are they going to try to preserve it further, or how do you think the future of this is going to be?
Yeah, obviously we've got the actual flooring just on the other side, and that's the secondary flooring that would have been put onto this site. Now when the roof fell through, it actually destroyed quite a bit of the floor here, because the floor just over there would have been filling the whole of this site. Now we do conserve it the best we can, at least obviously whenever a few bits of stone become displaced. They are originally obviously put back with some mortar and everything in that. But I think it's just over time we just have to preserve that as much as we can. There isn't really other improvements that we can do with it, because we have so many tourists coming through here, walking across the floor. I mean, it's an inconvenience, of course, but it's obviously giving everyone that kind of experience exactly what the Romans would have been doing.
How many people do you have visiting this site every year?
Every year we have around 1 million people come through the site, give or take. So there's a lot of people coming through. And you can imagine the floor takes quite a bit of that impact from tourists.
So do you think in terms of the future and in terms of, I was saying earlier, in certain cities and countries they have glazing over the floor. Is there a particular team that's very focused on preserving this heritage, or is it just as over time, you see what happens with it?
Yeah, I mean, we do have a conservation team, obviously making sure that if there's any damaging parts of the whole site, for example, if any bits of the slabs of stone or anything off the flooring ends up becoming loose or anything, we do have a team to obviously put that back and repair that the best they can. But a lot of the site, if anything too big becomes too, damaged, especially obviously we've got the steps leading downwards as well, it's very hard to replace that in a way, at least big slabs. So I think it's literally the conservation team have to do their best, at least with repairing with the materials that they have, at least.
Sorry. Just how far down does it go then? So a couple
the pool,
of steps.
Yeah, the pool here is about 5 foot deep, so it's about 1.5 meters. Wow. So it's very, very shallow because the Romans would have been swimming up and down. They would have been sitting on the side of the bath, enjoying some of the luxuries, buying some food.
What would it have looked like back then when they built it?
So when they would have built it, today we have this upper terrace, which you can see you've got the Roman emperors and rulers at the time. But this terrace wouldn't have actually been here in the Roman period. They would have actually had a vaulted roof. If you can see the housing just onto the other side, add a few meters onto that, and that would have been their roof. So it would have been very, very impressive. And it would have been a barrel vaulted roof to allow water, whenever rain would happen, it would actually roll off the side. So it was very, very excellent engineering that they would have done in architecture. So yeah, you would have had that roof on the top, and obviously over time when the Romans left, that would have been decayed and destroyed over time. And it was actually found, quite a few roof fragments that you can see around the site, just behind you, was actually found in the pool itself. So when the roof fell through.
How important do you think it is for these original pieces of walls, these pillars, this floor? How important do you think it is to preserve this, and for the visitors that are coming here, for them to actually experience this? Is it a huge part of the experience as someone who sees them coming?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's definitely, it's a very important thing, at least for tourists. I mean, when you're coming here, obviously you're paying and obviously coming through to see the Roman baths. So it's very important to at least keep the actual architecture that the Romans would have been putting down preserved and presentable to everyone else. Especially with, obviously, you've got the plinths here to actually support the pillars. It's very important because it builds that kind of history around the site. And if everything was just reconstructed, it would lose that kind of feel, that kind of feeling that you would be experiencing here. And it's a good thing, at least when we're on our tours here on the site, it's a good thing. It kind of gives you that impact that Romans would have been here 2,000 years ago, and you're walking on the same steps and touching the same stone, exactly what they would have been doing.
I mean, as soon as you walk in here, you have this feeling. You feel as if you're walking somewhere that, there were people walking through here 2,000 years ago. They had their own culture, their own heritage, their own history. And what I find really fascinating is the story in regards to how this was actually originated, formed, and the Roman baths and how it came about. So could you tell us a little about that? I mean, where did it come from?
Sure, that's no problem. So there was actually a local tribe here beforehand, the Celts, and they were actually called the Debunny tribe. And obviously they were occupying this, it was very, very small village, if you think about it, very small settlement. And obviously they were used to very, very mud huts and straw housing. And they were actually worshipping a goddess here on the site, which was called Sulis. And it was a swampy area full of hot bubbling water coming up. Now, when the Romans got here around 43, 47 AD, they ended up obviously discovering that they had a goddess here, that they were residing within this hot water. So they ended up adapting that god, and they had their own god, which was very similar to Sulis, of wisdom and of health, and that was actually called Minerva. So the good thing is, obviously, a very intimidating force, a very alien force you don't expect to come to this site. And obviously when they were building, it was very nerve-wracking, you can imagine, for the locals.
Would you classify it as an invasion, or was it just an integration?
It was definitely an invasion at first. Obviously there would have been quite a few battles at first, and no integration would have been happening. They want to assert their dominance when they got here, first of all. But obviously when the locals knew that they lost, then the integration process would have been happening. And that's where they combined their own god, which was Minerva, exactly the same as Sulis, of wisdom and of health, and of war, funny enough, as well. So it's very, very convenient for them. Combine them together, and that's where you get the name Sulis Minerva coming from. And that's where they would have been worshipping, having offerings, and even throwing curses into the spring here on the site as well.
So was it the local leaders and the Roman leaders who'd come together and made that agreement, or was it sort of, how it just ended up happening because of the consequences of the actions that they took.
Yeah, it definitely would have been. Obviously, we don't have any evidence, any obviously reports or anything from that period stating what would have gone on.
Yeah.
But yeah, most of the leaders of at least the locals here, would have been kind of forced into it to actually adapt to the obviously invading Romans that were coming here. So they would have come to an agreement. And funny enough, obviously, this bathing house here would have been available for Romans at least, but the locals would have been able to at least adapt and come into this pool here and enjoy some of the Roman lifestyle, even if it wasn't important to them.
But in terms of how this place was sort of founded later again, and it was, you said the story behind that was quite fascinating. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, brilliant. So we've actually got this housing on top of here, and the housing here used to be connected to a row of houses going over the tops of the baths. So that house up there is actually the street level in Bath today. So the housing that used to be on top of the actual baths here, one of the housing actually ended up springing a leak. Water was actually coming up through the cellars. So underneath them, they didn't realize that this water was obviously slowly rising, or there was a trap in the water that forced it up at one point. And that would have burst through their floorboards and it ended up filling up their cellars, which was obviously a bit of a problem for them. But obviously doing tests on the water and having that indication when they found this statue head on Stall Street about 100 or so years before that, they obviously had the inkling, the idea that there would have been some site underneath that house. So they got permission, obviously, to take away the housing. Obviously, there would have been a bit of resistance because no one really wants to leave their housing. Took down the houses. They had, obviously, an excavation team that was bearing all the way down. And the great thing is they found the lead-lined bath first. So the original lead the Romans would align the bath with. And that's how they knew. Eventually cleared the whole site, and you see exactly what was cleared, and you can see the rest of the site that was rediscovered.
I mean, I absolutely love that story, and even more so because you said there is a part of that lead pipe still here,
Exactly right.
Right there. How old is this lead pipe roughly?
Well, the lead pipe would have been here from the actual Roman period, so it's about 2,000 years old. Which is very, very impressive. This pipe here would have actually been going down to the other rooms, so it would have been allowing the water to travel all the way down and provide the heated water for any of the other occupants to at least bathe in and enjoy.
It's an absolutely amazing history. I mean, we could stand here talking about it, I think, forever. There's so much to it.
So educational, and it's just fascinating to see, to relive that time period, and original stones, and the actual sites.
There's an explanation. I mean, there's an explanation to everything you feel when you come into this place, and there is a very distinct atmosphere here. So thank you so much for your time.
It's no problem.
It's been amazing hearing about it, truly. So thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it, ladies.
Thank you. Absolutely fascinating standing here next to the Roman baths, where so many people have come here for so many centuries. It's 2,000 years old. I mean, it's very similar in a way to the heritage that we have and the history that we have across the Middle East and places. And it's really reminding me of some of the places that we've visited as well previously. It's just interesting that no matter where you go or where you visit, people always have this element of identity that ties in with history and heritage.
I think for me what's been profound is how they've got their conservation team, and while they want to be accessible, they're also preserving their heritage. So, and they've got millions of visitors here, and I was reading some reviews online, and people were saying that it's almost like going back in time, and standing here it feels like you feel a sense of identity here, a culture of a community that existed way before our time. And when you look at how well they've engineered this place, with the piping that was, the tour guide was explaining that it was imported from Rome, and I think it's just so fascinating to see another part of history that you're living through in this time.
My name's Stephen Clues, and I'm the manager of the Roman Baths. That means that I'm responsible for quite a lot of what goes on here. One of the most important things we do, of course, is actually to look after the core resource of the Roman baths, which is the ancient monument, and things like the statue of Julius Caesar standing next to me here. In doing that work, we do it with the longer term in mind. If there's a failing of conservation that may have occurred in the 20th century, it was sometimes that they didn't always use the most appropriate materials, or perhaps the wisest techniques to carry out particular types of conservation. But I think today things are much better, and we use very sympathetic materials, and we do think long term over what we're doing. So, for instance, taking Julius Caesar as a case point, about 7 or 8 years ago, he was given a protective shelter coat. And over the course of 10 years, that coat will have gradually disappeared, weathered away, and then we'll repeat the process, providing protection against the elements, because bath stone that this is made of is a very fragile material, easily dissolved by chemical weathering. Acid rain wouldn't be good news for bath stone. So providing shelter coating is a way of protecting it for the long term.
For you, how important is this for your tourists and the people who are visiting to have this experience, and what do you want them to take from this place when they come to visit?
I think the immediacy of the monument is brilliant, and I think for people who come here, being so close to it is something that's very memorable. Of course, the very special characteristic of the Roman baths, unlike lots of other Roman baths, say, or other ancient monuments, is that it does have hot water flowing through it. It's a unique aspect, but it's something that also brings its own conservation issues. We read about how in the Roman Empire they were excellent architects, good builders, all this sort of thing. They very rarely put a damp-proof course into a building. So one of the consequences of that is that in carrying out conservation work, we actually have to deal sometimes with the deficiencies of the original builders. Of course, today you would put a damp-proof course in and you wouldn't have problems with rising damp or salt and so on. And so our conservation management here does address those kind of issues as well. And it's done on a regular basis, but a small-scale intervention. We're not here only to conserve the monument, we're also here so that people who come to see it can benefit from it and enjoy it. And we also need to make sufficient money to pay for all this. Of course, conservation isn't free. And so I think it means that in managing the site, you have to balance these three considerations of conservation, of the customers, and indeed the commercial aspect of the site as well. And you have to invest in all of them. If you just invest in one, then you're probably going to have something that is probably not sustainable in the long term. If you never invest in conservation, you've got a problem. If you never invest in commercial development, actually you've got a problem. And if you don't invest in people who come here, provide good facilities and so on, then actually you've got a problem.
So would you say that conservation is a long-term process, is an ever-going process? Is it something that you have long-term and short-term goals for? Or is it something that's just constantly happening and it constantly will happen?
It is a long-term process, and I understand that we struggle with the third law of thermodynamics, which is that everything basically crumbles to dust in the fullness of time, so it's something where you can intervene to slow down the rate of decline or deterioration, but you probably realistically can't stop it altogether. It's something that actually will happen. But that doesn't mean that in the meantime we can't enjoy it for hundreds of years and benefit from it. And it's such a magnificent way of passing on understanding of past cultures to people today. to enhance their understanding of the world they live in.
Well, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and also a member of your team earlier, so thank you so much for your time. It really is amazing to be here and actually experience and understand the actual history and the work that goes behind maintaining such a beautiful site, so thank you so much for your time.
Okay, it's great. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so very much. All the best. Today we've witnessed a lot of inspirational work carried out by locals in this community who've really taken it upon their own shoulders to preserve the heritage. So we're just going to have a recap now of the sort of experiences we've had today. I mean, it's been a really, really long day. How have you found it?
I've seen quite a few pictures of the baths. I've seen people visiting. It's a completely different experience actually coming. And we often say that when you visit places, but today I walked down steps to the lower terrace and I literally gasped that it was so beautiful, and I felt like I was treading back in time, that the Romans were here, this is what they built, their engineering intelligence was inspiring, and to relive what they had created 2,000 years ago with the lead pipes and the mechanisms. I think it's something that, there's so much in today's, generations we can learn from, and it's an honour for us to be able to live through that. So
I couldn't actually believe they let us walk on the floor that's 2,000 years old, because a lot of heritage sites you go to, and they said that is very rare and distinct for their site, is that it's all normally cordoned off. You can't really access it, like it's not open for the public, or you have to have special access, and that is also the case in many of the Middle Eastern countries as well, where we have our heritage. But it was quite fascinating, the fact that it was literally there. It wasn't glazed over like in Safa al-Marwa in Mecca. It was just there for you to step on and for you to admire and see the lead pipe from the Romans, and it was so alive. Yeah. It was so connecting to a history that a lot of people find their identity in, and I think seeing that is admirable. I mean, it's something that I felt was very inspiring.
I was actually thinking of the mountain in Mecca when we go for Umrah, Ziyarah, Safa Marwa, when in particular downstairs in the bath, Roman baths, they had the stone originating from 2,000 years ago, and they kept mentioning, the speakers kept mentioning about ensuring that they had the accessibility so people could actually walk on the same places, and they had to measure that against preserving it, but they didn't want people just to have to look and not touch. And I was thinking, when I looked at the stones and they said that these are the origin of the building that they had and the Romans had developed there, that they hadn't glazed over this awful tar. It was the original piece.
They really care.
They really do, and we're walking on it. So I just think, are there better ways that we could be doing things in the Middle East, where we have millions of visitors, by all means, but look at how we've progressed in these countries to take that knowledge. We have, they're lacking finances here. They're saying, we hope that people can help us preserve our heritage.
Well, they were even saying that in the Roman baths, when they have a problem, it's literally the locals that chip in. And
definitely.
I think that just shows you the importance of grassroots when it comes to actually working together to make your voices heard. And
I think our grassroots seem to be the ones that are aware of it, are passionate. We don't have a lack of money either. I mean, Saudi Arabia is not a small. It's not it's a rich country, so we're actually fortunate we don't have money issues. But it is I think the intellect behind preserving and the intelligence behind understanding that cultural heritage belongs to generations before, present and future.
So that's all from us today here from the city of Bath, a World Heritage Site, a city that is founded on its principle to respect and preserve heritage that many of the locals here truly believe in and really have taken it upon themselves to preserve the heritage of this place. It's been a fascinating journey today. I myself have discovered much about the city and much about the principles of heritage that are core to the humanitarian principles of every individual from various backgrounds and various religions and various creeds. So today it's been an honour to be here in the city of Bath with the most hospitable people who've welcomed us into their city, and we're very grateful to have had the opportunity to be here. That's all from us today. You've been watching The Heritage Trail. Join us again next week for another episode.